I think people just need to understand that it's not as insurmountable a task as it might seem.
Thank you to Jason Holmes in New London, Iowa for sponsoring today's video. Jay, why were you destined to become your own boss?
Quite frankly, I am not a good employee. I am just not good working for people. I never have been. I've always had a little bit of a problem with authority, a little bit of a problem with being told what to do when I don't understand the reasons for it, or if I see a different way to do it, and especially in like the creative realm, because I did my first probably 10 years working for other people, either as an editor or a director or, whatever it was. And I always had issues. Like if I saw a different way to do it and I couldn't do it because the boss didn't want it that way. So I always wanted to be my own boss, like from the get.
But, we hear this thing that film is a collaborative medium. I think everybody's probably said that in an interview. So at some point, though, somebody has to answer to somebody. Yeah, you can never really truly be your own person or free. You're always answering to somebody.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that if you have a production and you're just going to be collaborating with other people?
Well, what I find, like in my collaborations, I am usually hiring. So I'm usually the one at the top, so, and I find with collaborations, especially on low budget stuff, it's a matter of, letting people have, their own creative freedom to express themselves and do their thing within, some confines, of course. But I like with, composers, for example, usually for the first draft, I let them go hog wild. Like, what do you want to do? And, then I'll make adjustments if we need to. But, as far as business partner collaborations, I don't really do those anymore. So I have my own production company, Zapruder Flicks. So I do that. I own it. I operate it. I fund it now from the money that I've made from movies, the money I continue to make. So I pretty much don't have a benefactor anymore. Occasionally, I'm getting ready to do a bigger project next year, a bigger feature, and that will be for other producers. But they are pretty good, at least creatively, being hands off. So I think that will go pretty well.
So this production company that you have now, is this your first one, or did you have ones prior?
Yeah, I've had several.
Oh, you've had several, okay.
Yeah. I started, my very first production company was just called, I think it was Zapruder Pictures. And those whole Zapruder thing, it's Abram Zapruder, who shot the Zapruder film. And a friend of mine in college, it was his idea. And, that was our production company. And I did that for years. And about maybe 4 years ago, I switched over to Zapruder Flicks, which is just me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Or J Flicks.
Yeah. And I have a couple, not incorporated, nom de plumes, on YouTube now. It's J Horton Films, but that's not necessarily an official, LLC. It's just a title I use sometimes.
What were the first steps you took to form your production company?
Well, I went to legal. I've done a lot of LLCs, so I went to LegalZoom. I set up the LLC through them. I do have an entertainment attorney, but I try to do as much as I can myself, and then let him look over the final things. So he's spending less time, costing me less money, and I kind of take the same tact for cast and crew contracts and everything. I try to do drafts myself. And then see, have him look at it, is this okay? And if it comes to distribution, of course, I let him look at those contracts.
If you had to start over from scratch, how would you begin to build your production company?
That's a good question. If I had to start all over, I don't, it's hard to say. Without the knowledge I have, it'd be a different story. Knowing what I know now, I think I would pretty much do what I'm doing now. So my story of Zapruder Flicks, so I was doing narrative features for many years. And I made a transition in 2019. I was doing some filmmaking videos on YouTube, and somebody had suggested documentary filmmaking, so I kind of started moving into that. And when I do documentaries, it's a whole, different level of documentary. I'm doing, very low budget, usually, except for my time and, effort, there are no budgets. But, I started doing those and realized that I could kind of be a self-contained unit with this. So I spent about a year just like busting these things out one after another. And then as they started earning money, I built a floor. So after I think maybe 2 years of doing that, I had enough of a floor, enough of a passive income coming in that I could kind of move back and start doing narratives again. So I would take the money from that, or mix it with crowdfunding, and I'll do a narrative once every year and a half, and then supplement with, now I do about 6 documentaries a year, whereas back then I was doing like 12. But I would try to do, whether it's documentaries or narrative films, I would do stuff as cheaply as humanly possible, and as self-contained as possible, as much ownership as possible, and, get the passive income going so that I can have some cushion to do bigger projects. So that's probably the approach I would take if I was to start all over.
How important is a business plan when starting a production company?
I think it's really important to know where you're going and understand that you need to keep your budget absolutely as low as possible, because the money that you're going to make from almost any kind of film these days can be very little. It can be a lot, but averages it's much lower. So I think it's important to understand that and know how to build that. I don't know if I would say I have like a quote unquote say business plan, other than keep my budgets low, make a profit off them, make more of them, and do bigger projects.
So you didn't do an official business plan when you started
No.
the previous production
No,
companies?
I kind of have fell into learning how to do my own business. I didn't go to business school. I went to college, but I was an arts major. So I've never had really a business mind. But, when I started doing the documentaries and getting more into the marketing and the business side of it on the back end, I actually found I had an affinity for it. And I'm pretty good at that stuff, but I never looked at it as, this is my 4-year plan for this or anything like that.
Where does your frugality come from?
Probably from upbringing. I was raised frugal. So, I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, single mother, low income household. I grew up in a trailer park, and, we never had money. So, it was installed in me from a very young age to be, frugal. And then I learned very quickly, even working for other people, keep the budgets low. And so it translated. And when I saw them doing it, I was like, hey, I want to do this too. And if I'm going to do this and put my own money in, and it's a risk to put your own money and time in when you're not sure what your return's going to be. That's one of the scariest things about being an independent filmmaker is you go into these endeavors and, there's no guarantee that any movie you make is going to make money. So like it is a risk. It's definitely, filmmaking is definitely not for the risk averse. And you learn how to feed crews, and like food is so important, so you have to feed them well, but you also need to feed them cheap, and you need to how can I get the most bang for this buck? We just did a big feature in Ohio, and we had the woman that owned the location, and she was really, really into it, and so she helped us cook. So we gave her a siphon, and bought the things, gave her a little salary, but it was much cheaper than say like a catering company here in LA, and we got really nice home cooked meals. And you can do that yourself, wherever you are. If maybe not you personally, but you find somebody, a friend or, family member or somebody like that, and, then give them a little bit of money, pay for the ingredients, and, just have it go, and you can keep it cheap.
Great, yeah, and I'm sure the food's cheaper in Ohio than it is here in LA.
I think in general it was, yes.
I think everything is cheaper somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay, this is excellent. How many people work for your production company?
So for my production company, I have, and I wouldn't necessarily call them employees, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, probably half a dozen people that work with me or for, I hate to say for me. I know I say like I'm the boss and I'm the top, but at the same time, it is kind of, it's a collaboration. So like I have a DP director that I met about 4 years ago when I first started doing docs. And he had a strong interest in cannabis and what was the other, the dog rescue. And so sometimes what we would start doing is I would let him set up the interviews, and then I kind of, trained him on, how to shoot the interviews. And it got to a point now where I live in Georgia, he still lives out here, and he wrangles interviews and he shoots them. And then, instead of, doing an upfront salary with it, we have a rev split situation, and he gets so much, profit from the movies. And, over these years, it's become really hefty. And then I have a couple other people that I work with like that. And then I have maybe 3 or 4 people that I'll have do some post stuff, and that's usually, pay for the gig.
What have been some of the biggest challenges as an independent filmmaker having a production company, and how have you overcome them?
I mean, the biggest problem with having your own production company, it's just you're responsible for absolutely everything. The legalities of it. You have to stay in compliance. So, like with a lot of LLCs, you do an LLC for a single project, which I usually do. And, after it runs its initial license, like my lawyer said, you can kind of let it lapse, because like you've kind of passed to the point where you're going to have legal action against it or anything like that. So 4 or 5 years, they can kind of go. But for your main company, like Flix, which I consistently run, and it's been going for, I guess, 4 or 5 years now, I have to constantly, I have to make sure every year that I'm in compliance, that my taxes are paid. Taxes are a big thing owning your own business. I used to do my own, and I was doing them kind of poorly. So, it got to a point, and I'm frugal, I don't want to pay for it if I could do it. But I finally, bit the bullet and, got a Hollywood accountant, and, they do my taxes now. And it is an expense, and it's an expense I don't like to pay, but I think it's smart too. So there's that. And finding people to work for you for, a reasonable rate. Like, I don't believe in not paying people or not doing, an equitable split or something that works for everyone. But when you're making stuff for nothing, that can be really hard. And especially if you're putting the money into it yourself. It just becomes a little more of a risk. So you have to manage that. So it's personalities in the business, and the changes in the business, and the changes in how the taxes work, and mostly that.
What's one mistake you learned the hard way that now you make sure that never happens again?
I mean, business-wise, I can't think of a big one that I did, with the exception of not doing my own taxes. So I did end up owing, I forget what the amount was, but it was several $1,000s from previous years, because I had just not done my taxes correctly. So when I got the accountant, that caught up to me a little bit. And I didn't get in trouble, no audits or nothing, but it could have been. And then other than that, it's mostly personality wrangling, because you are in, for no better term, you're a boss, and you have to be able to, work with people and make sure that they're getting what they need out of it, you're getting what you need out of it. And communication is I think that's, whether it's making movies or running a business, is the biggest thing. Especially when you're doing low budget stuff, you have to be really upfront. This is what this pays, this is what this entails, and this is what I expect. And, if it's a rev split situation, that can be a little tricky, because you're okay, this is your rev split, and you're definitely going to get this %, but what is that money actually going to be? It can differ movie to movie. I have movies that honestly, they make $4 or $5 a month, and then I have others that make 10,000 a month. So, the person that's working on that $5 one, they can be like, well, this can't be right, and you have to share, numbers and stuff like that, and stay communicative so that they understand. And I try to let, filmmakers know from the front if you're doing a rev split situation, or if you're doing deferments, which I typically don't do. But if I do, you have to have that conversation. I did this movie called A Hard Place back in February, and I had a couple of my producers that were working on it, and our budget was tight. So I was like, look, I really want your guys' help, but if you're going to be on this as producers, it's going to have to be a deferred situation, and this is the risk. You may never see this money. It might not come in. If it does, you'll definitely get it. And my last 3 movies, it came in, so most likely you will, but you might not. And you have to be upfront about that, totally clear. So I've worked with, producers in the past where, oh yeah, man, we're gonna pay you this, smaller amount up front, and then you're gonna get a deferment. Your deferment's gonna be like this, and the movie never makes money, you never get the deferment, and then, you have bad feelings about it. So I think communication is huge.
What are your final thoughts to anyone thinking about starting a production company?
So my main advice to someone who's going to, run their own filmmaking business, they're going to start their own production company, understand the upfront costs, and they're not, to start an LLC is not very expensive. Depending on your state, it can be as little as a few $100s. I think when I started one last time in California, I think it was 800, right. And then I don't remember what the yearly fee was, but it might have been 800. But understand that, and understand, if you're going to run this business for a length of time, that is an ongoing thing. And that's why, especially if you have an individual, project with your LLC, over time, the movie might not earn that much money and you're still putting in that money. So understand that. Understand that you're responsible for things. An LLC shields you from, any kind of, inadvertent, illegal thing, maybe you didn't do your taxes right or something like that, but it doesn't totally protect you. So you have to be aware of the ins and outs of it. I think starting out, you don't necessarily have to have an accountant if you're talking small enough numbers, but once you start getting in around the 6-figure range, I think you absolutely need to have an accountant, whether it's just for, a single project or it's, multiple projects. But all in all, I don't think it needs to be a big intimidating thing. Setting up an LLC is something anybody can do. LegalZoom is very helpful, and when you have questions, you ask them, they'll answer it. It's not hard, So I think people just need to understand that it's not as insurmountable a task as it might seem.